This is Charter Local Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance in Long Beach. We are joined by Gerrie Schipske. She served on the Long Beach City Council for
8 years.
8 years. She's now writing for the Long Beach Business Journal, mucking it up, I'm sure, in the best sense. And I want to speak with you about a recent column of yours. And the title of the column is "We Are Watering Dead People." Yes. Was that the title?
Yes,
something like that.
It was to get people's attention, and it did.
And it did. So talk to me about what you uncovered, and we'll use it to broaden out the conversation as it relates to the drought.
Well, I actually am doing a historical book on 2 historical cemeteries in Long Beach. And in the process of going through the records and figuring out what was going on, I discovered that neither of these cemeteries have access to recycled water. So we have a feeling in this country that cemeteries should be green and look like gardens. And to do that, they're using drinkable water. So
how is that possible?
That was my question, especially in this day and age, because there was no planning done to bring in reclaimed water in that particular location, which is at Orange and Willow.
In Long Beach.
In Long Beach. Now, contrary to that, Rose Hills and Whittier years ago figured out very costly to use drinkable water. They're totally recycled water. We have another cemetery at Carson and Cherry, the Forest Lawn Cemetery. They use recycled, reclaimed water. Our 2 cemeteries close by don't. And so what I discovered in looking into the records and then talking with the water department is that they claim that they don't have access to reclaimed water easily.
Because?
Because there's no pipeline from the reclamation plant, which is at the 605 freeway on Willow.
Okay.
It's called the John Vanderlyn's reclamation plant, and that to pipe water into these 2 cemeteries would cost in excess of $2 million.
Meaning one time?
One time, and they claim, now their response, because they responded to my column, that it wouldn't be economically feasible to do that because what is costing them to use drinkable water would only be slightly more than what it would cost them to use reclaimed water. There is craziness in this.
This seems like a disconnect.
It's a very
Do you buy their economics? Do you buy
well,
their...
I think in what they are estimating is the cost of transporting reclaimed water from a faraway location, and then there's no way to store it over there. So these are the things that it's not being discussed publicly about our problems with water. When it rains, we do not capture rainwater.
Right.
We have no way of keeping this water so that we're all looking for the El Nino to come.
Right.
That isn't going to be a solution to the drought.
So I'm wondering, on a broader scale, can we use this discovery as a way to seek grants? We did pass a water bond in November 2014, $7.545 billion.
Absolutely.
Part of that money is supposed to go for recycled water.
Well, I contacted the State Water Resources Board. There actually are grants. And again, the response that the water department came back with is just would be too costly. So they're not even willing to explore getting a grant from, there's actual specific grants to provide reclaimed water for facilities, nonprofits, which is one cemetery, or municipalities, which is the city. And the city basically just blew that off.
So with regard to these cemeteries, and I don't necessarily want to beat up on them, I'm sure there are plenty like them, but with regard to these cemeteries, there's this whole notion that, brown is the new gold, and are we seeing cemeteries watering less?
We are. We are in both instances, although I will tell you the city cemetery looks awfully green lately.
Okay.
But the Sunnyside Cemetery, which is adjacent, is showing the effects of reduced watering. And then I was just up at Rosemead looking at their cemetery. They decided 2 years ago to stop watering. So it is entirely brown, and they're returning it to what probably the area looked like before we push to have lawns and park-like settings.
Brown can be attractive, especially if you sprinkle it with rock formations,
and mulch,
California natives.
Right, and that's what they're doing.
They are doing that.
Yeah.
What about artificial turf for cemeteries? And I ask you that because the big rag, I'll say, on artificial turf, it gets hot. Aside from the expense, but it gets hot. Well, no one's really walking on it. And if you are, you got your shoes on. Yeah. And so it seems like that negative could be put aside?
Well, here's the problem. You have to go in there and cut it to fix all the grave sites.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Numerous
That's a
grave
good point.
sites, tombstones, different locations. There's a hill and sloping area.
Right.
Some of the areas are already depressed because
Right.
that area over there particularly, which is a totally other interesting story,
Right.
was the site of a big war over drilling. There is a lot of oil.
Is there oil where the dead people are?
Where the dead people are.
Are the dead people the oil? Did I say that out loud?
No. Where the dead people are, there's a lot of oil under there. In fact, at one time, the entire area was surrounded by oil derricks, and Ansel Adams
The Ansel Adams.
came there, took a picture of it because he was amazed that in the cemetery, you could look around and it was entirely covered with oil derricks. And there was a fight to try to get the oil drilling actually in the cemeteries. And the court said no, that the families didn't own the oil rights. They only had access to the top.
So now, is there drilling below the graves?
There was at one time, there was what was called whip sign. It was from
What does that mean?
From an angle,
Okay.
slant drilling. And actually, if you go to the city cemetery, you can still see oil wells behind it. And they're still all around the place. So there's a lot of oil still under there. It was one of the richest oil deposits. That was the beginning of the oil find in the Long Beach area.
So where do you go now with this, I'll call it investigative piece, because it really was, if you think about it. I mean, you're researching one book and all of a sudden you discover something
right.
else. What do you do with this information?
Well, you've got to have elected officials who think it's important. And one of the things that I added in that article that I thought was astonishing, I think there's a 2010 report that the Long Beach Water Department put out about where we need to put reclaimed water. Cemeteries weren't even listed. They had golf courses, they had some parks. And again, their argument is that it would be too costly to pipe in. I have an idea. Signal Hill wants to have reclaimed water. Signal Hill is right there.
Meaning the boundaries, it's really.
In fact, that actually the cemetery.
You called Larry Forster or Ed Wilson, or I'm trying to remember the other members of the city council there.
That's next.
Right.
It's not in their property, but what would have to happen is the city would have to buy reclaimed water then from Signal Hill, because Signal Hill has its own water department.
Would the city have to buy it, or could the cemetery itself enter into a deal?
Well, the city owns one of the cemeteries.
Okay, so there.
Right, and the other one is a nonprofit association. They would have to purchase it.
But can they do that? I mean, is there you can bypass. See, I think that's an inspired idea.
Because they're right there and they want to use it for their own city, so that would make sense that they must be able to put some kind of connections locally.
Right.
And since, by the way, the Long Beach Cemetery should be called the Signal Hill Cemetery,
Is it
because
Signal Hill?
that's where it's located.
love it.
And there's some affinity to them helping out.
I want to ask you, since you're such a strong community activist, what you're hearing about the drought and the upcoming El Nino, because it's confusing. It's cognitive dissonance at its best. We don't have enough water, and now we're going to have too much water.
Well, we have some LA radio hosts that have been making a big issue about the fact that if you take a look at where the consumption of water is in California, 85% is going to agriculture, 10-15%
Of the
is
usable
going to
water,
almonds.
yeah.
Okay, and that residential really accounts for a fraction.
Yeah, that's true.
And I think there are a lot of people who think that, and I don't know that everyone is convinced. One, that there's a real drought, and every time it rains, they think, oh, this is out.
But it's not.
And we're seeing El Nino. But unless we do something to replenish the water table, which we have not done, we could have all the rain we wanted, and it's going to go right into the flood control and out to the ocean. So that is the piece that's missing. We really need to get aggressive on how do we capture rainfall and put that water table back to where it wants
Her
to be.
name is Gerrie Schipske. She is now a columnist for the Long Beach Business Journal. You can read her columns every
2 weeks.
Every 2 weeks. How exciting. I think
Inside
you're having a
City
ball.
Hall.
Inside City Hall. My name is Brad Pomerance. We're in Long Beach today, and this is Charter Local Edition.